Today, we're going to be covering off building cross-application APIs and reports in minutes. Dan's going to be taking us through a real hands-on example of how this works.
We have some people that are new to Senshi, so I'll do a very quick refresher. The focus of today is on building cross-application APIs and reports and being able to do that in minutes. So there was one theme around kind of self-service enablement and business enablement and kind of simplification of that. So I'll definitely cover that. So I'll do a quick intro, refresher of what is Senshi, what is a data fabric, and then jump right in and we'll just together build a bunch of APIs. And please, the more interactive, the better. So just interrupt me with any questions, any comments, suggestions, and especially once we get into the building part of it. So I'm hoping to maximize the value that each of you are getting out of the session. But for those of you who don't know the backstory, Senshi itself is a play on the word cinch, which means simple. And one of the core themes of the company is the recognition that data itself is irrelevant. It's actually intelligence that people are after. So intelligence is the new oil. By no means is it data. And we see a huge opportunity in terms of unlocking large complex organizations' ability to employ some of the characteristics of the human brain and other elements of nature and bring that into software and how we architect our systems to enable things like plasticity and collaborative intelligence and other such capabilities. And we see our platform as being a key enabler of that outcome. And thank you all for joining today. This is episode 5. So if you haven't if you weren't able to join us for past ones, they're available on demand if you go to our website, or you can go direct to just senshi.tv and you can see not only the learning series videos, but other videos as well. And we're going to be building that up as a good asset for sharing best practices and training and others. So you're going to see a lot more content to come in the weeks and months to come. But definitely, if you're finding this interesting, don't forget to check out prior sessions. And if you can join in the future live, that's awesome. And if you're not able to make it, feel free to just watch the recordings after the fact. So we're going to be keeping this as a kind of a continuous stream. And if anyone has any very specific topics that they want to cover in future sessions, just drop us a note. We want to, again, maximize the value that you're getting out of this. So let me jump in. So today we're going to cover building cross-application APIs and reports in minutes. Quick refresher on kind of the concept of a data fabric and the concept of collaborative intelligence. So the traditional approach is that you have applications that you're buying or building. You have existing applications, you have new ones, and it doesn't matter if you run them in the cloud or on-prem. It doesn't matter if the architecture is monolithic versus distributed versus client server versus 3-tier versus n-tier versus microservices versus service-oriented architecture. They'll fundamentally work in the similar way where you're going to connect your code together through APIs, creating a code fabric. But behind that code is data, and the data is where that integration friction is. So the conventional approach doesn't matter if you're doing integration over REST or over ETLs or virtualization or synchronization or replication or hundreds of different technology approaches. The pain point is really that there's incremental effort on a point-to-point basis, and you're not really able to reuse those integrations to avoid future integrations. So you're chasing your tail on a continual basis, and that's been true for many decades, as most of you would know from hands-on experience. And by introducing a data fabric, which is really a broader shift that's bigger than just the Senshi story, that's a big shift that's happening in technology, it's pretty exciting, it's changing that. It's essentially creating a data fabric, kind of like what APIs do in terms of creating a code fabric, where you can reuse data, but without providing copies of that. So in a programming context, it's being able to pass by reference instead of by value. It's pointers, it's links, just like links on the World Wide Web. You don't have to, if you want to publish a document and link to whatever Senshi.com, you don't have to create a copy of Senshi.com. That would be preposterous. Yet that's how we generally do data integration. And so this is the beginning of the end of that entire experience. So the fabric in the middle becomes really that network that works conceptually like how you picture just any computer network working, but it's a network of data where existing applications connect to the fabric once, and that data is now available on the fabric. and that could be real time, it could be batch, depending on the frequency and capabilities, and it can be unidirectional or bidirectional. And that data, once it's on the fabric, can now be reused an infinite number of times without having to do point-to-point integration, as well as the ability to create new experiences without needing to stand up new data silos, because the traditional approach is every new app has a new database. Therefore, you're doing the integration. So being able to create what we call autonomous data, where data is born on a data fabric, which is a naturally connected platform, really negates the need for data to ever exist inside of a silo. So any new attributes, any new entities, any new systems, all of that data can be born free. And what's happening here is you're essentially enabling a pay it forward effect, or a network effect, where every project is really building out that fabric such that that fabric can enable the next project to not have to start again from scratch. And that's where the intelligence comes in, and the collaborative intelligence. And that's now possible because of the benefits of plasticity, which means you can change. And I'll get into a little bit when we're building the APIs around. I'll show you a little taste of kind of how plasticity actually works in practice, beyond it just being a uber conceptual thing. But think of every data set as you think of a fabric. You've got threads, horizontal, vertical, and they're interwoven. The threads may be coming from legacy systems. It could be autonomous data, but every fabric, because it's not just one, it's a connected set of fabrics. Every fabric has rows, it has columns, and at the intersection of that is ultimately data that could be, this attribute 2 for record 2 is autonomous. It's built in the fabric natively, but perhaps attribute 1 is coming from Salesforce, and attribute 3 is coming from another service. So really, it allows you to create that kind of connected, blended view of that, such that the ultimate users of that data, who may be not only seeing it and querying it and doing analytics on it, but even changing it and adding to it, they're protected from the complexities of all this fragmentation of data. And at the same time, you're avoiding the further fragmentation. So this is just another perspective on that, where you're, a single node on the fabric is in fact a blend. So this little circle is just a people data set, and again, you're seeing some rows coming from one source, another row coming from another, and different fields can be coming from different. And the fabric's built-in connectors enable you to configure that to be either one way in, one way out, or bidirectionally. And being able to do that at a lot less effort, and the way that you're using it is opening up really new patterns, new architectural patterns, where you would otherwise be buying or building an application. So the traditional approach is you buy or build an app. Every app has the same fundamental high-level architecture, where you got an experience, you got some type of data store, and you've got some type of need to do integration. By introducing a fabric with plasticity on top of that, you can do augmentation of your existing apps and avoid integration, but at the same time, by plugging them into the fabric where that fabric changes, that app gets more intelligent over time. We talked about that in a prior session. We showed how we could make Salesforce smarter by connecting it and adding intelligence to that, and Salesforce being a stand-in for really any existing application. And we talked in a past session about the idea of autonomous data, being able to create data natively on the fabric. And then in a future session, we'll cover how you can then create experiences on top of that autonomous data, where you can basically build an endless number of applications, but the data isn't inside of the application. The application is really now the experience into that data. Which is the separation of data from applications. And as we, during the sessions, we're giving a bit of a demo of the metadata experience, but we're going to go deeper into that in future sessions. So today we're going to talk about APIs and how you can build APIs, especially in the context of building application experiences that can be connecting in data that is either autonomous or connected into the fabric. So I actually skip over this slide, but this kind of shows the guts of the underlying architecture, all the different components. So data synchronization, universal governance, plasticity, and semantic modeling. So today we're going to focus on the APIs. So I won't cover this unless there's any questions. And I'm going to come back to this slide. But before I switch into the demo and start to build a bunch of things, let me just pause and see if you guys have any thoughts or questions on anything that we've covered so far, which is largely kind of a refresher of the concepts. Anyone have any thoughts on anything that I've covered? Okay. All right, so can you all still see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, all right, great. All right, so we're in the fabric now. So what you're seeing is our own fabric. This is our, think of it as our private data network that we use for running the company. And I've shown this in past sessions, so I won't go through it in depth again, but you can see all of our nodes of data. These are data sets. So let's actually go in and start to build some queries against that. So I'm in kind of the native experience, and let me zoom in a little bit so you can see that better. So this is the default home screen of the platform. You can see I have 156 objects that I have bookmarked. Some of these are tables, 99 of them are tables. And I also have some queries, which is what we're going to do today. So you can see I have 51 queries that are already built that I have bookmarked, and some I built, some other people built, and we're kind of sharing queries back and forth. And a query can retrieve data. It can also change data. And obviously they can range in complexity from incredibly simple to having a lot of complexity and even logic within that. And in future sessions, we'll cover the introduction of user-defined functions for when you get into more advanced functionalities. And I'm not going to cover experiences today. We're going to focus on queries. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create not a table like we did in the last session. We're going to create a query. So now what you're seeing is a different skin. This is the query builder interface. So this is what a user who is entitled as a builder would be able to see. You can see that it's just pre-populating some kind of templated SQL syntax. So the way that you're building the queries, for any of you who are familiar with ANSI SQL, this will be immediately familiar, but as you're about to see, we've also added a number of simplifications to that to make it more accessible even if you don't have advanced knowledge of SQL. So I'll come back to that in a second. On the left here, I'm seeing the entire fabric, which is the same thing that I'm seeing here. It's just a different experience on that. Like this is a visual view of that, and this is a hierarchical view of that. But it's the same subnets, it's the same tables, it's the same columns, because it's all filtered based on what I have access to. So I'm only seeing the things that I have access to. So if I were to, let's go with a table, let's go with invoices as an example. I can search for that here, and I can see invoices lives inside of the operations network. And if I expand that, I can see all the associated fields of that. And you know what, I'm actually going to do invoice details, which is the line items of an invoice. So I can find that, I can see the structure of that. And just to kind of show you what that looks like in the other experience, if I do invoice details, here I'm seeing the visual view of that same structure, so I can see where that's connected. So I can see an invoice detail links to an invoice. So if I come back here, an invoice detail links to an invoice. So see how there's a link there? And then I can expand that, and I can see that an invoice in turn links to an order form. Here you have that invoice again. And if I click on that and zoom out, you can see all the connections that it has. And one of them is an order form. So I can now see that an invoice gets to an order form, and I can essentially follow all that data. But this makes it really easy to kind of drill down because it's arranged as a hierarchy. But let's build a very simple query. So I'm just going to drag that over here. And of course, I could retype that, but I'm going to be lazy with my keystrokes today. Let me just grab a couple of fields here. So let's just say that we want the total charges, and let's do the product or service. So I'm just grabbing two fields here. So select total charges, comma, product or service from, and it's the name of the data set, and it's qualified to be within the domain, and I want to filter out deleted data. So if I play that, I'm getting that data set back instantly. Now, before I make this more advanced, let me go ahead and save this query. So there's a query tab, and then there's an info tab, and I can give this a name. So I'll call this learning series demo query. I can give it an icon. Let's give it a purple graph, and I'm going to put it in a folder, what we call domains, which are really containers for objects, which include queries, but other things like tables and experiences. And then you'll see that I can choose what type of data do I want to return, and what is the format of that when I'm invoking this query through the built-in API. So it defaults to comma separated, but I could do JSON, I could do XML, I could do other delimiters. Let's go with JSON for this particular one, and I could optionally give it a description here. But let me go ahead and save that. So I've now saved that query and it's giving me the live result every time I run it. So it's called Learning Series Demo Query. So if I go back to my network, I now have 157 objects bookmarked, whereas before I had only 156. And if I want to look for that, I can see there's the query there, Learning Series Demo Query, and it's bookmarked. I can push it back into the marketplace and debookmark it, but I can now run it anytime I want and get the live answer to that. Now, this is a very simple query, but that query could do a lot of complex operations and pull data that is blended in from multiple sources coming from many applications. But again, I'm insulated from that complexity. But let me go back into the query builder mode, and let's actually just add some additional capabilities against this query. So let's go back to the invoice details table, and let's just expand that. And what I'm now going to do is I'm going to pull in some linked data. So if you remember the invoice details, if I go back to that, links to an actual invoice. So let me expand the invoice. So I'm just going to expand that, and now I'm seeing the structure of an invoice. And you saw earlier that an invoice in turn links to an order form. So I'm going to expand that. And let's say that I wanted to pull in, I don't know, the invoice number. So let me just grab that. So I want the, actually, no, I want the order number of the order form. So I'm going to pull that in, and notice the syntax here. It's order number, but that's under an order form, which is under an invoice. So this dot notation allows me to do what would typically in SQL, which is what you're seeing as the kind of base syntax here, a joinless join. Now, for those of you who have an advanced knowledge of SQL, you'll know what joins look like and how they can be complicated, but you can actually do that in the platform as well. You can do old-fashioned joins, but this saves you from having to basically bridge between these two tables and then these two tables only to get this field. So it is what we call a joinless join, and I can pull that in, and now I'm getting that linked data. So you see it's the order number coming from the order form. So that's a couple of levels deep, but I can go to, let me go a little bit deeper. So let me go from the order form to the sales opportunity. And the sales opportunity would be data that may otherwise exist inside of a CRM. And for us, we use autonomous data as our CRM, but we've also blended in Salesforce. So this data set is actually a blend of data from multiple sources. And then from the sales opportunity, I can go to the actual lead. So you can see there's no limits on the level of depth. I can go 1,000 levels deep. Although probably the most I've done is maybe 20 or so, but it's nice to know that there is no such physical limit. And then I can go from the lead. Let's say I want to go to the actual primary contact of that particular lead. So I'm going to go to the contact, and let me just go one more level deep. Let's say I want to grab their personality. So I'll grab the personality of that lead. So I want the personality of the contact for the lead that converted into the opportunity that generated the order form that was part of the invoice. And if I play that, I'm going to get that data back instantly. So you're seeing I'm getting the personality, and I can even pull in, what defines people who have that, what are the motivations of people who have that personality. So you can see it's enabling you to get really just 360 anything, because I went in from an invoice detail and I'm pulling that out. But if I now save that query, so that query is now upgraded with these additional pieces of data, and I can share this query with other users. So if I go to design control, I could say give access to individual users. Like for example, I could give access to Joanne, or I could give access to the sales team. And as simple as saving that, it releases the query, but that doesn't release the data. So the data controls are universally protected. So if Joanne, for example, only has the ability to see charges in a particular region, that's going to be auto-filtered out, whether it's filtering out rows or columns or obfuscating individual data cells. You don't have to worry about that when you build and share queries. But what's really cool about this is this query doubles as a report and as an API. So if I wanted to, let's just do a quick pivot. So now I'm seeing a pivot table representation of that. And you can see that there's 118 records in here, but maybe instead of a count, I want to do a sum. Maybe I want to sum whatever the total charge is. Maybe I want to group that by the personality of the contact. And maybe I want to further filter that just for people who have an architect personality. And then I want to now slice that based on the product or service. And maybe I only want to look for, a builder pack, for example. And I want to then group that by order number. So you can see I can slice and dice the data any way that I want, whether I want it to render as a tabular view or as a chart or now the built-in visualizations in the platform are very limited. This, don't confuse the data fabric as the visualization engine, but you can plug in Tableau or Click or Power BI or any other visualization to it, where this query becomes an endpoint, and now I can render it in beautiful ways and benefit from the fact that I didn't have to do all that integration and all that other complexity to be able to create that view. So that's the kind of the visualization side of it. But what it's also done is this little green button here has created an API automatically. So I can just copy that URL into the clipboard, or let me just go ahead and open that in a new tab. And I'm just using Chrome. And let me just look at the underlying source here. So what you're seeing is the resulting data set coming back as JSON. If you remember, that was the format that I chose as the default. But I'm getting this back. This is a fully standardized REST API that I didn't write any code for. So any query, this one is simply retrieving some data, but whether I add parameters to it, whether I make it do multi-step operations or data changes, is instantly an API. And again, what's cool about this is if I gave this query endpoint to Joanne and she doesn't have access to see a slice of data, the API will again respect that. So it's truly enabling universal enforcement of cellular level protection, regardless if you're a person or a machine interacting with data, whether it's over REST or any other protocol. But now let's say that I wanted to parameterize this query. So I'll go back into the design of this query, and let's add a parameter to this just quickly. So if I play it, you can see it's just giving me the entire data set back. But let's say that I wanted to allow a filter based on a product or service. So I'm just going to add an and condition here, and I'm going to say, actually, you know what? Let's do let's do product or service. So and product or service like, and I'm going to do concat. So the syntax here is SQL. So it's good because you can just Google to look it up, and obviously we have our online documentation. And I'm going to add a parameter here. So I'm just going to use the @ sign, and I'm going to say product or service, and I'll add another % to close that off. So basically it's matching that, and I could make this case insensitive. So if I wanted to just do basically uppercase of this, and I'm going to do the same thing here. And what that's going to do now is if I play this query, you can see the engine is just rendering this. And if I just submit it without anything, it's giving me the entire data set. But let's say I want to pull in anything that has the word builder in it. So if I add builder, and it's now case insensitive, it's now filtering that based on that data set. And if I go ahead and save this query, and if I submit it again, let's just submit it with builder again. Then if I go back to that green button and again open it in this tab and then view the source again, you can see the syntax here is it's the URL, but then it's basically a query string that's passing in product or service equals builder. But if I wanted to change that to be whatever, something, let's say service, I'm now getting a different result set back. So I'm passing this in through an HTTP GET just through a query string with a very simple parameter, which of course is optional, because if I don't supply that, it will give me the entire data set. But as you can imagine, I can add multiple parameters and start to parameterize the queries. And again, whether it's a select or a data change, I'm still getting that same capability. So there's obviously a lot more that you can do that I wish we had time to cover, but we can cover in future sessions. Like when I'm building these queries, I can build a query that can retrieve data from the past using the present schema, or use the past schema and the present data. So the time machine is something that we'll cover in future sessions, which is very powerful. But hopefully this gives you a taste of the speed at which you can build and expose data on the fabric through APIs where this data is blended from multiple applications. And I've definitely taken too much time because we don't have a whole lot of time, but I can actually go over if anyone has any questions. We can always do it offline. But let me pause and just open it up for questions.
Dan, it's Michael Hubbard here. So in the data underlying this, whether it's actually in the Cinci data fabric or retrieved real time from via a connector to some other application, is so the end user is sheltered from that. They don't need to know that.
Yeah, so it doesn't get in the way. They may need to know that. Like if I go into a data set, you need to be able to show that lineage to them. So like if I go to people as an example, just as a data set, because this is one that we blended in data. So you can see how these records are coming from Salesforce. Those are all just test records. And then you can see this one came from Cinci and this one came from Freshdesk, which we use for ticketing. But just because this came from Salesforce doesn't mean all the attributes came from that. So I can inspect and see, where did every individual cell of data come from? So this is one record, but you're seeing, this field came from Salesforce. This field came from Full Contact. This field came from Crystal. This field came from our own AI model. Mitesh, who's a solution architect, he populated the tags. So you need to be able to have that visibility, but for me to be able to query it, I shouldn't need to know this.
Right. Sorry, but I guess, is the data persisted in the data fabric, or is it real-time pulled from like the Salesforce when you do that query if it hasn't been persisted in the data fabric?
Yes, so it is persisting the data. So of course, data that is only on the fabric is persisted as the system of origination. But the data that's connected, even if it's real time, like in this case, our Salesforce connector is real time. You can also configure it to be batch, but it is persisted for a number of reasons. But it enables me to do a true cross-application query where I can now run that in an operational context. Maybe I need thousands of transactions a second. So for example, the Salesforce APIs are much slower than me basically taking Cinci, connecting it to the Salesforce, and then using Cinci to API enable that data. I can get exponential performance above and beyond that because Cinci is in fact caching that data. So keep in mind, you don't use a fabric like you would use a data lake. You don't just dump all of your data. You're using it as you're building operational capabilities. So it is all persisted, and that's how we get to data version control. It gives you an element of decoupling, but I think the main immediate benefit is the performance. It's a separate resource domain. It's a separate even crash domain. So if Salesforce were to go down for a couple minutes, I could still serve queries.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Any other questions? I guess I'm also just curious if anyone has any thoughts on this after seeing kind of the speed at which you can build an API. Has anyone seen anything that's comparable, or like do you see this as an opportunity to accelerate relative to the conventional approach to API enabling data? So I'm just curious how you guys are all kind of perceiving this. I'll have to get some feedback.
Dan, this is Rob. I'm just wondering, like, software solution providers and software companies, I mean, they build up an integrations department. Have any of them approached you, or have you had a discussion with a solution provider on using Cinci as that API layer or that integration layer or data fabric? Sorry.
Yeah, so we have, and we actually do have some partners that are already building solutions on the fabric.
Okay.
So the idea of an application experience is actually packageable. So we have some pretty big partners, a lot of them in the consulting space, that want to start to get into the productization of services. And this is a way of accelerating that because it takes away the friction of developing bespoke solutions. but it also gives that benefit to the end customer where they benefit from that plasticity. Because if I'm building the experience, I'm going to build a model that makes sense to me as the builder, but that doesn't mean that's how you want to model your data. You're a bit different business than me. You're going to do it the way that makes sense to you. And that's the magic here, is it's the separation of an application, not only from the data itself, but even the data model. It's decoupled from the data model.
Cool. No, that makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions from anyone? Or thoughts? Okay. Quiet bunch today. That's cool. All right, so that's it for today. I know we're 4 minutes over. Apologies for that. But Joanne, do you want to, I guess, back to you for next session, etc.?
Sure, thanks very much. So we are just about to post into cinchi.com/learn. You'll be able to register for the next week's session. However, in the chat, I've also added in the fact that you could sign up right now for episode 6 and episode 7. So you'll be able to just link directly to those. So I'll just give you a second to actually click on them so you've got them bookmarked already. Episode 6, we'll be doing metadata-driven forms. And then in episode 7, we'll be doing data synchronization. So lots more hands-on demos that Dan will take you through, and you'll be able to see the stuff work in real time. We'd also really like to hear from you if there's a specific topic that we haven't covered off yet that you would like us to cover. We can definitely make sure that this works to some of your needs as well. And if there's any other questions that you have outside of this, just feel free to connect with Dan or myself, and we'll make sure that we take all your questions into account and comments. Thank you so much.
Yes, and like Josh's comment there, that everyone knows that the big twist is in episode 6. So let's build up some hype for the next one. It's going to be exciting.
And this will be available on demand as well later on this afternoon, so you can share it out with your networks.